Our third and last presentation in this session, when will be followed by a panel discussion, is going to be given by David Edwards-May. David is a consultant on inland waterways, and in fact, he's the president of the Inland Waterways International, and he says he's a life member of PIANC, so from the womb, he's been attached to this subject matter. So we're looking forward to his comments on opportunities and challenges for inland waterways. So David, welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor, privilege to be here. My first PIANC conference, as Todd just said, was actually the PIANC, the Paris conference in 1969. So this has been going on for 48 years. I've got 15 points, and I need the green thing here. There you go. So I think it should be feasible, 1 minute per point. I could go on and on, but just a provocative subtitle to my talk here, Infrastructure in Competition, simply because compared with the maritime transport, which is you don't have a choice, inland, you do have a choice. Inland, you can decide as a government to suspend a project. I mean, look at the Rhine-Main-Danube. We're celebrating this year the 25th anniversary of opening of the Main-Danube canal. And that was blocked for 4 or 5 years. And you could afford to block it because there were alternatives. And actually, I was struck by the presentation by the manager of the Port of Nuremberg just a few years ago, visited with a group from the Canal Society of New York State, who seemed to consider that the actual waterway connection for the Port of Nuremberg was not that significant, only 500, 600,000 tons a year, and his absolute focus was on the road and rail interchange. Anyway, that's just an example of the fact that it's infrastructure in competition for funding in very real terms. And since I said I started in 1969, this was one of the first maps I looked at and analyzed and was fascinated by, the master plan for French waterways. I mean, here we're talking about 50 years, the plan has been to integrate with the Rhine-based European waterway network according to the dimensions that are economically viable, decided by the European Conference of Ministers of Transport, which became the International Transport Forum, back in 1953. And now, today, we are at last about to embark on construction of the link between the Seine Basin and the Rhine network. So there is a basis for planning these investments, which are necessary to be able to use the most environment-friendly mode of transport. This is the agreement by the United Nations Transport Division, Working Party on Inland Waterway Transport, and this was adopted in 1996, has now been adopted by 19 countries, and this is the basis for planning integrated waterway infrastructure throughout the continent. To present this is another kind of provocative presentation that I put together just to show how many missing links there are actually in the waterway network in Europe. There you can see the one north beside number 10, E10, is the Seine Nord that will now be built. There's also the idea of Seine Est, Rhone, the North Sea Mediterranean, Danube-Oder Elbe, and E40, and Black Sea, Baltic Sea. Some of these are in the European Union core network corridor priorities, others not yet, and that's another aspect. Why does it take so long for projects even to be adopted? But that's how integrated the European inland waterways could be if all those links were completed. Now, this event, today's event, it's only a couple of months after an important high-level conference on inland water transport at the UNECE, steering towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And I looked through the papers, and there's some obvious links to be made with that body and the parties present on that occasion. I was struck by this neat summary of the importance of inland water transport presented by the EBU and also managing the International Vessel Register. And I was struck also by this finding by an investigation undertaken in Russia, where the number one factor quoted by people asked what is preventing them from making more use of the infrastructure, of inland water transport, is infrastructure limitations, of which there has been a lot of discussion in the last couple of days. But as I said, here in one of the major waterway investments promoted very actively by the European Commission in partnership with the corresponding governments is, some years ago it was Project 30, the other one was Project 18, which is the Danube. It's the Seine-Nord-Europe Canal, which is going to be built, in principle, starting this year. This is data, I won't read it, extracted from the feasibility study that's already dates back quite a few years, but it is a useful reminder of exactly how important and how valuable it is to transfer freight inland to waterways. As you can see, approaching 1 million tons a year, potentially, of CO2 saving by using water transport on that 107-kilometer long canal, broadly following the line of the existing Canal du Nord. Now, one thing that I really feel is, it struck me over the last 15, 20 years, is how waterway projects touch on many, many different areas which are also part of resilience, climate change, adaptation, and the needs of the population. For example, the water supply system for the Seine-Nord Canal, as originally designed, was going to secure a very substantial volume of water for drinking and industrial water supply in the Lille area, Lille, Tournai, Kortrijk, a population of 3.2 million, and in reality, the canal could still serve that purpose in the future. That function was taken out in the reconfiguration of the project, decided after the change of government in 2012, as one of the measures to bring the cost down. The cost was going to be approaching 7 billion euros, and by a number of means, this was brought down to maybe 5.5 billion euros today. But basically, when you're dealing with funding, justifying investments of that nature, you are touching on a huge number of different areas, and in particular, concerning inland waterways, we're dealing with very significant volumes of fresh water, which is itself a resource that is perhaps not sufficiently, not often enough taken into consideration, even when looking at the initial feasibility, because the initial feasibility is about transport. It's not about all these other parallel functions. This is not just a European question, the question of the network, completing the network. It's also relevant in the USA, where, I don't know if I can use a pointer here. Is this a pointer here? Yep. Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, gotcha, yeah. So here, there is a lock that construction started, I think, about 25 years ago, and it's been regularly delayed for precisely the reasons I was mentioning earlier. There are alternatives you can manage through, and there's not sufficient determination, not a sufficient political push to accelerate and to complete the project. Just to point out, there's going to be the World Canals Conference, which is part of what IWI is all about, in Syracuse on the Erie Canal later this year in September 23rd to 26th. And one of the subjects that could legitimately be put on the agenda there is, can we not, despite the smaller dimensions of the Erie Canal, alternatively called the New York State Barge Canal, compared with the main 12-foot channel network throughout the USA, is there not a role for waterborne freight? And I know there are a lot of initiatives that are pushing for increased freight use of that waterway. Then this is a visualization of the junction in the middle of the Danube-Oder-Elbe waterways, basically canals linking the Oder and the Danube and the Elbe. So the Danube is down there. This is the branch off to the Oder, and this would be the branch to, sorry, I think, yeah, that's right, yeah. And this is the branch down to the Elbe. There are feasibility studies in progress at the moment for that waterway. That shows it on the map, illustrating also that there are some things that are very much up in the air regarding the actual choice of itinerary, particularly to bypass, as presumably one has to, the Morava in the lower course of the river Morava. Seriously, we have problems of the actual nature of the rivers, how readily they can be made navigable, particularly also in Poland, where the river Vistula now is practically unnavigable from way below Warsaw up to not very far short of Oświęcim here. And this bit is completely developed for high-capacity navigation. But anyway, basically, that's just another minor illustration of the missing links and the consequences they have. We heard just now about limited water transport from Mr. Kanuka in India. Well, in Poland, it's even less than 1% use of inland water transport. And why? Number one reason, infrastructure limitations. So, I won't read out all those, but it's important to realize that the European Commission's vision is absolutely fervently in favor of increased use of inland water transport, and hence the contribution of 40% plus to the cost of the Seine-Nord Canal. And I was mentioning other functions. I mentioned water resources. A very significant function is, of course, tourism, recreational use of waterways. The infrastructure that we create is of incredible value, and that also needs to be built in and is part of response of populations in densely populated parts of the world, throughout the world, is increased use of the resources one has close to home, and that is part of what recreational use of the waterways throughout Europe is about. This is a distorted metro-type map of European waterways I produced for the UN ECE committee, simply so that we could visualize missing links throughout the network, and that's why it's distorted, so that you can see in lots of detail all the, the missing links in England and Wales particularly, but also in Belgium, in the Netherlands. There are about 30 missing links from the point of view of recreational movements of boats throughout Europe. So as you've gathered, part of what I've been doing during my career has been mapping, and I'm delighted also to give you the opportunity to acquire either the UN map, which gives you the picture regarding commercial waterways and the categories in terms of tonnage transported, or the European waterways map, which covers all the functions of the waterways. And that's what I propose to carry on doing as long as it's feasible. And I hope to be able to plot and record the actual implementation of some of these projects that are going to enable inland water transport to deliver according to its full potential. I'm sure I must be at the end of my time now. Okay. No, I don't mind finishing earlier. That's fine. Okay. Thank you.